Now here we are standing beside the F-class tramcar. This was the third type of tramcar designed for Sydney. Now what we have here is a Californian combination bogie car. The previous one, the D car we looked at, of course, was a single trucker, and this is a bogie car. Now all these were simply was a Californian street cable tram from San Francisco enlarged into an electric vehicle. So if we look at it and imagine, these were the little cable cars that were running up and down the California street in the city of San Francisco. So we didn't use much imagination in designing our first electric bogie cars, but this proved to be one of the drawbacks, as we will see in a moment. Now, the seating arrangement on these cars was a little bit different to what we'd had previously. We had these side seats where, as we will see, the people would be sitting in like manner. I guess in the early days with the long dresses and what have you, there was no problems, but I think this type of seating would have caused a little bit of a sensation if it was in vogue today. Now, as you can see by Darren's position in the tram here, had this been a cable car, that's where the gripman would have stood, and in front of him would have been the two levers, the brake lever and the cable gripping lever, which would enable the cable tram to move. So all they did was retained exactly the same seating as was on the cable cars. Now this proved to be their undoing, as these cars only seated 44 people, and unfortunately, or fortunately I suppose we should say, the travelling public was so great in numbers that these trams couldn't cope with it. So in 1901 we had our first diversion from this type of tramcar, which so far had been adopted for electric services in Sydney, and we moved into the crossbench design, which we will have a look at in a moment. But completing our story on the F-class cars, they were quite a sturdy little vehicle, well built. As you can see, there were 251 of these cars constructed altogether between 1899 and 1902. Now 250 of that total were converted during the 1920s into crossbench or toast rack cars, and this one particular tram survived that orgy of rebuilding. And the reason for that is simply explained. From 1910 onwards, the number of drivers and conductors being employed by the department rose dramatically, and it was necessary to keep one single tram, for book purposes anyhow, out of regular traffic and for the use of driver and conductor training. This tram was the one chosen. For that reason, of course, the department never modernised it or bothered to spend any money on it, which is very, very fortunate for us, because we now have the only example of an electric bogie Californian combination tram left in the world. This is the sole survivor of a type of tram which was found in almost every Western country. One of the little features of these cars, which most people are unaware of, is the tail light arrangement. Now, what we had for a tail light, of course, was the red glass panel, this ruby glass panel, one on either side, with the lighting up here. Of a night, the light would shine through, and became the tail light for the cars. And this was used on the C, on the F and the G-class tram cars. It was their method of using a tail light. All right, now we're going to move down the car. We'll have a look at the open end, which is a little bit unique in this day and age, and we'll move on to the N-class tram car. Now, as you can see, this F car anyhow has got an open front. Now, what we've got to understand is that all the trams constructed up until 1908 had open fronts. This was the standard type of tram car. What you see here is how they all were. In fact, there are over 800 trams constructed into this configuration. Now, in about 1906-7, there was a little bit of a industrial dispute, I guess we'd call it these days, and the traffic crew from Rushcutters Bay Depot invited the railway commissioners out one wintry morning when it's pouring raining on the Watson's Bay line with an open fronted K car, and invited them to have a drive and see if they thought that the wet weather gear they were issued with was sufficient under the circumstances. Well, it goes without saying, of course, that the railway commissioners refused their very generous offer, and investigated the men's demands a little more strongly. They set up a committee, and this committee found that there was some justification in the men's demands for better protection. So from 1908 onwards, it was decided that all tram cars constructed would have closed-in driver's protections on the front, and that all the trams built up until that period that were still in service, or that it was intended to remain in service, would have their fronts fitted. Now, before we go any further with that story, there's just a little addition to it which I think will be of interest to most of you here today, and that is on the bottom of the report the Commissioners made a little note which said that although acceding to the men's demands, we find it difficult to see what they're complaining about. There were only 5 deaths from pneumonia reported last year. So I guess we can conclude that they considered that a reasonable number of demises. I don't know how that'd go today. I don't think it'd go down too well somehow. Okay, so now what we had from 1908 onwards was the conversion of all the cars to a closed-in front. And in a moment we're going to have a look at one of those fronts and see just exactly what a change it made. Now, it might be interesting to note that here we are, 1991, and this tram car is still in use and still in good condition. When originally constructed, it cost the princely sum of $1,700. Well, I'm sure you'll agree they got good value for their money.